With the first pick in the 2020 NBA Draft, the Minnesota Timberwolves select Anthony Edwards from the University of Georgia. The Golden State Warriors select James Weissman from the University of Memphis. The Charlotte Hornets select LaMelo Ball from Chino Hills, California.
Who the fuck is Tingus?
This is the all-time worst pick in the history of draft.
Anthony Bennett from Toronto, Canada.
Who the fuck is Patrick Williams?
Ladies and gentlemen, we finally made it. What's up, guys? Welcome to another video, and this is the first video on this channel that is post-2020 NBA Draft. Obviously, we had the draft on Wednesday night, and we got to find out where all these prospects ended up after what seemed like an eternity, around 18 months since the 2019 NBA Draft occurred. And so today I'll run through every single team and analyze their draft performance in as efficient a way as possible. I'll also put timestamps in the description below, so you can find a section covering your favorite team or a team that you're interested in if you don't have time to watch the entire video. So with that said, let's get right into it with the Atlanta Hawks. So the Hawks stayed put at 6, and they grabbed big man Onyeka Okongwu from USC. I like Okongwu as a prospect, but I'm not really sure of the fit here. This is a team that already has Clint Capella under contract through 2023. They have John Collins, who's seen as a franchise piece. So I'm really just curious what their plan is for Okongwu, as it seems like there's a decently crowded front court ready to play in front of him. I think they could have used the pick to get some more on-ball help in the backcourt, like Tyrese Halliburton was still available. I think he would have fit perfectly in Atlanta. But, after a few days, they did sign Rajon Rondo. They signed Chris Dunn, so that should help Trae Young in the backcourt and just the overall defense of the Atlanta Hawks. In the second round, they took Skylar Mays from LSU with the 50th pick, and Mays is actually the type of guy I would have targeted at 6 if I'm Atlanta. Perfect archetype to play next to Trae Young, decent size. He can defend the perimeter decently well, good shooter, solid off-ball guard. And again, I would have thought that Atlanta would have targeted this type of player at 6. But again, Mays is solid at 50 as a nice hedge bet. But yeah, overall, I'm not a huge fan of Atlanta's draft. I think there are a lot of different directions that I would have liked to see them go, as opposed to taking Okongwu. And again, this isn't me like knocking Okongwu as a prospect, but I'm just questioning the overall fit with this roster. So with Boston, I love the Aaron Nesmith pick at 14, especially with Gordon Hayward opting out of his player option and heading to Charlotte. Nesmith will provide elite level wing shooting and should make up for some of the gap left by Gordon Hayward as he leaves and at a way cheaper price. The Celtics' second unit had major offensive woes last season, and I think Nesmith should really help in that regard in the immediate future. And I also think he's a nice upside play as well. I do see all-star potential if he can improve his ball skills and passing. And yeah, I just really like the Nesmith pick. The other two picks for Boston, not a huge fan of. At 26, they took Peyton Pritchard from Oregon, and many seem to like the pick. A lot of people had him as a first rounder. I had him outside my top 60 as I'm just not really sure he'll hold up athletically in the NBA. And at 47, they ended up taking Yan Madar, another backup point guard option who's probably going to be a stash for Boston as they're pretty tight in terms of their roster. But Madar, I do like him as a second round pick, even though I did have him outside my top 60. And again, Madar's a really good defender, very smart operator offensively. I do have concern about the shot, but he does make sense as a stash player for Boston in the short term. But listen, I'm just not really sold on Boston using 2 picks on backup guards. I would have liked to see Boston diversify a little bit, maybe take a big man, especially since big men seemingly were flying off the board on Wednesday night. So, I'm not a super big fan of what Boston did outside of Nesmith. But again, hopefully they just signed Tristan Thompson, so I think that probably alleviates some of their front court concerns. But still, I just would have liked to see him diversify a little bit more. So Brooklyn actually had a pretty solid night, in my opinion, even though they only had 1 draft pick. They took Reggie Perry at 57, so late in the second round. The Mississippi State big man should offer them spot minutes immediately, just because I don't really think Brooklyn's front court is all that deep. So from that regard, I think it's a good pick. I'm not a huge fan of Perry as a prospect. I had him outside my top 70. But for Brooklyn, at 57, I think it makes sense for them. But overall, I do like what they did on draft night. They did end up getting Landry Shamet and Bruce Brown through draft trades. And I really think that just kind of bolsters their backcourt. It adds to their shooting. They kept Joe Harris, which I think is a big win. And so, listen, quiet draft night in terms of picking new players. But I really like the moves they made in terms of bolstering this roster that is really likely to compete for an NBA championship. I loved Charlotte's draft night just because they ended up getting LaMelo Ball at 3, who I think is going to be the best player from this class. He has transcendent offensive creativity, and that'll give him a great shot at being an all-star for a franchise that just needs juice. His presence alone in Charlotte will make them an exciting basketball city when Charlotte really hasn't been a basketball hotbed since it came back as an expansion franchise in the early 2000s. So I love that pick. I see LaMelo as a real building block on this roster. And so, yeah, no issues with the LaMelo pick at 3. Then they went out and they grabbed Vernon Carey and Nick Richards at 32 and 42 respectively. I'm not really sure I'm seeing the path here. I don't like taking Carey at 32 and then doubling down with Richards, who I actually like more than Carey 10 picks later, just seems redundant and displays a lack of awareness about where the league is going. Players like Carey and Richards are depreciating in value fast, and taking two guys like that just lacks foresight in my view. At 56, though, the Charlotte Hornets did get Grant Riller from Charleston, who I really like. I saw him as one of the best guard finishers in this draft, and I thought he would end up going in the early second round. So to get him at 56 is awesome value for a guy who can bring a great scoring package to this roster. So while Charlotte made some questionable decisions in the middle of the draft, the LaMelo Ball pick should outshine the remaining 3, and that's enough to make this draft worth it for the Hornets, in my opinion. Obviously, the Gordon Hayward signing is just a totally different story, but this is a draft recap, not a free agency recap, so I'll just leave it at that. So the Bulls had the 4th pick in the draft, and it's fitting that my Bulls preview carried absolutely zero weight in what they ended up doing. My video failed to mention Florida State wing Patrick Williams once, and that's who the Bulls ended up taking at 4, as Williams pretty much experienced a meteoric rise up draft boards in the past few weeks. Listen, maybe it's because I've already just talked myself into Williams as a Bulls fan, but I think this is a worthwhile swing for Chicago. Williams fills a pressing need for Chicago as a 3-and-D combo forward, and he does have significant upside due to his athleticism. In a draft where it seemed like there was little to no separation between 4 and 15, I think betting on upside was a smart move, especially for a Bulls team that lacks top-tier talent. Now at 44, the Bulls took a stash guy in Marko Simonovic. I'm not a huge fan of this pick, as there are tons of guys still available at 44 that I would have loved to see Chicago get. Simonovic might end up being a solid player, but as a three-point shooting big man, I just don't really like the redundancy it presents with Lauri Markkanen being there. That being said, though, the Bulls killed it with the two-way signing of Kansas guard Devon Dotson. Dotson somehow ended up going undrafted after having a first-round grade by some evaluators. And listen, I think he'll be a very solid backup guard, as his quickness and defensive toughness is something the Bulls really need in the backcourt. So overall, listen, it's not the guy I would have gone with at 4 in Patrick Williams. But again, I'm a Bulls fan. I'm going to be optimistic about it, and we'll take Patrick Williams. Simonovic having a hard time convincing me. Devon Dotson, though, excellent pick for the Bulls. So overall, it was a pretty quiet night for the Cleveland Cavaliers, but they really hit their pick out of the park, in my opinion. With the 5th pick, they took Isaac Okoro from Auburn, and as many of you guys know, Okoro was the 3rd best prospect on my board. And listen, the Cavs were rumored to be primarily interested in Obi Toppin and Denny Avdia, and honestly, I was fully expecting them to take one of those two guys and pretty much laugh at Cleveland for taking both of those guys, who I thought would have been reaches either way. But listen, I'm really happy that Cleveland took Okoro. He will add an NBA-ready defensive element to a team that had a league-worst 116.2 defensive rating last season. And listen, I think Okoro has really high upside as well. I think he can do everything from pass to drive to defend. And listen, if he figures out the jump shot, again, if he just figures out the one thing that's holding his game back, Cleveland's looking at an all-star caliber player with the 5th pick in a draft that was perceived by many, including myself, to be weak at the top, which is just a gigantic victory for them. Dallas was a huge winner of draft night for me. They drafted 3 players that should all be high-level contributors rather soon. Josh Green at 18 I had as the best perimeter defender in the draft. The 6'6 swingman should be able to guard multiple positions and should really help a Dallas team that struggled on that end this past season. Alongside Josh Green, they also got Tyler Bay from Colorado, who is another guy seen as one of the top 3 to 5 defenders in this draft class. Just a guy with really quick hands, really smart defensive awareness, and so I think he'll be a solid player for them in the near future. And then at 31, they snagged Tyrell Terry, who I really like as a nice added perimeter shooting element that should bolster an already historically great offensive roster. Obviously they lose Seth Curry to Philadelphia, but I think Tyrell Terry can step in and get some spot minutes, just being able to shoot the ball along with like Jalen Brunson, JJ Barea, and those guys. listen, in terms of trading, they got Josh Richardson from Philadelphia, which I absolutely love. I think that's perfect. Again, just another guy who can just be a 3-and-D type of guy. Maybe not a whole lot of 3, but just a guy who can be a wing defender, offer some straight line driving ability, and he really should thrive next to Luka Doncic, who is really good at getting teammates open with his driving ability. So, listen, I really like what Dallas did here. They also got Nate Hinton on a 2-way deal from Houston, who I think is just an energizer bunny. Will do all the little things extremely well. And yeah, so Dallas, they're probably my first major winner of this draft night. I have about 3 or 4, and Dallas is definitely one of them because every single move just made total sense, and I'm really excited to see what they do next season. Denver had an interesting draft night, in my opinion. I think they got 2 guys in Zeke Naji at 22 and RJ Hampton at 24 who can definitely turn into solid NBA players. But right now, I don't really see them getting a whole lot of minutes just because Denver is on the doorstep of an NBA Finals appearance. And I really think that they just have so much depth that they won't really need Naji and Hampton to really create big impacts for them as rookies, which I think is a good thing. I think Denver is known for kind of slowly bringing along their rookies. We obviously saw it with Michael Porter Jr. And I think Hampton and Naji will follow along similar paths. Maybe they won't reach the ceiling that Michael Porter Jr. can reach. But overall, I do like these 2 picks as guys who have significant amount of upside, but are under no pressure whatsoever to really make an impact in their first few years in the league. Detroit was really active on draft night. They ended up with 4 picks in the top 38, and the roster needed an overhaul, and Troy Weaver did just that, so I really like what he's doing right now. I love the Killian Hayes pick at 7. He's kind of the golden goose here. He offers the all-star upside as a primary creator and shot maker. And yeah, I just really like that Hayes pick. I understand he has no right hand, but I'd bet on that improving over the next few years, and I really do like him as just kind of the crown jewel of this Detroit Pistons draft class. At 16, they selected Washington big man Isaiah Stewart. Honestly, not really buying this one. I'm not a huge fan of taking big guys like Stewart so early, but everyone loves the kid, and everyone thinks he brings a great attitude, so who am I to judge? Although they did just sign Mason Plumlee, so that's kind of going to eat into Stewart's minutes, so not ideal. They got Jahlil Okafor as well, so again, not really sure what's going on there. I wonder if they would have liked to have that Stewart pick back, given who they signed in free agency. At 19, they took Saddiq Bey, who I think is a great 3-and-D option for Detroit. I had him 14 on my board. I thought he'd be gone for sure by 19, but good job on Detroit for not overthinking this one and taking the player who really just fell into their lap. The second round, they took Vanderbilt guard Saban Lee. I'm lukewarm on this one too. I don't really see him as a guy with a whole lot of upside. I think there are a lot better players available at 38. Listen, he does have a 6'8 wingspan for only being 6'2", so his defensive upside is probably a little bit legit, but again, he's never really been a knockdown 3-point shooter. And again, I think they just could have gone in better directions here, especially after taking Killian Hayes, who's going to be like their point guard of the future, I'd say. So overall, kind of half and half. I think Killian Hayes might be the saving grace for this class, but I think Hayes and Bey are solid picks. Not really sure what they're doing in free agency right now, but regardless, I think their draft went okay, for the Pistons, right? I'm not really a fan of Golden State's draft here. The James Wiseman pick makes sense on the surface as he's pretty much a win-now selection, I would think, but I really doubt his long-term upside for a team that probably needs it. Klay Thompson's out for a second straight season with an Achilles tear. That sucks. But listen, I had Wiseman 13th on my board, and while he has a great 7'1 frame with very good athleticism, I just think the Warriors could have done better with a LaMelo Ball or even Onyeka Okongwu, who would have brought more skill to that center position, which is something the Warriors really value. At 48, they took Nico Mannion, and again, I'm not super high on him as a prospect. He does possess a great basketball IQ, and he should fit in mentally with the Warriors, but I worry about his defensive viability and just his overall efficiency on offense. Lastly, they took Boise State shooter Justinian Jessup at 51. Not really a fan of this pick either. He was a guy outside my top 100, and he's currently under contract in Australia. And I feel like the Warriors really could have bolstered their roster with a second rounder, and they just went with a stash option who doesn't really offer much outside of shooting regardless. They really could have gone after a guy who could get on their roster for this season and had much more in his bag than just shooting. But, listen, they're the Warriors, so maybe I'm just kind of overthinking this. They obviously know what they're doing, but honestly, from an outsider looking in, I'm not a huge fan of what they did on draft night. I'm honestly not really sure how to analyze Houston's draft. They only had one pick at 52, and they took Kenyon Martin Jr. from IMG Academy, the post-grad team. listen, I love his athleticism, and if he figures out some sort of skill to his game, I think he can be a very solid NBA player, especially getting him that late in the second round. And listen, I like the two-way signing of Mason Jones from Arkansas. I think he's a really crafty scorer. His overall savviness is just really impressive as well. So, listen, I like those two picks, but Houston does look to be on the verge of a rebuild with James Harden and Russell Westbrook requesting trades reportedly. So, I would have liked to see them keep their first-round pick they got for dealing Robert Covington to Portland. But, unfortunately, it looks like ownership is kind of in the interest of saving money. So things look pretty bleak for Houston at the moment, in my opinion. So I feel bad for Rockets fans. Kenyon Martin Jr. is a name kind of worth monitoring. I think he'll spend a lot of time in the G League early. But, his athleticism is really promising. So hopefully he can turn into something for you guys. But honestly, I feel bad for Houston. I really do. I'm sorry. So the Pacers had a really quiet draft night. They only had one pick, and they took Cassius Stanley at 54, so late in the second round. He was a guy I ranked 31st on my big board, so just outside the first round for me. And I really like the pick for Indiana. Listen, he's a generationally gifted athlete. We all know he broke the vertical jump record for Duke that was previously held by Zion Williamson. I think he could shoot the three well enough, and while he's still raw in terms of his overall offensive polish, I think this was an awesome pick for Indiana as they bucked the safeness trend that they had been known for over the past few years, and they totally went all out for upside. And listen, I think Stanley can really contribute to an NBA roster rather soon. So love the pick from Indiana. Quiet night overall, but I think they made the most with what they were given. I really like what the Clippers did on draft night. They got two picks. At 33, they got Daniel Oturu, the big man from Minnesota, and he was a first-round guy on my board, and I think there will be pretty real minutes for him off the bench for the Clippers. They did just sign Serge Ibaka. They have Ivica Zubac still there, but with the loss of Montrezl Harrell, I think Oturu can come in and provide spot minutes off the bench. And then at 55, they got the sleeper of the draft, baby. They got Jay Scrubb. Granted, they did get him on a two-way deal. But again, this guy, I'm telling you, he has lottery-level talent, and he fell to 55. So the Clippers pulled the trigger. They took him. That's a great pick for them. He probably won't be heard from much this season. But again, I really just like this long-term play, especially from the Clippers, who really don't have many first-round picks to look forward to in the coming years. So Jay Scrubb kind of gives you that prospect that is probably worth working with in terms of just developing his overall basketball skills. So again, really like what the Clippers did here. They didn't have any first-round picks, but they ended up with two first-round guys on my board. So the Lakers ended up not having any picks in the 2020 draft after they traded the 28th pick in a package that got them Dennis Schroeder from Oklahoma City. And honestly, that's perfect for the Lakers. They didn't really need any draft picks, maybe just to fill out some empty spots on their roster. But overall, Dennis Schroeder is going to provide way bigger value in the short term than any draft pick at 28 would. So Lakers didn't end up with any pick, but they're going to be just fine. The Heat only had one pick in the draft, and they used it on Memphis forward Precious Achiuwa with the 20th overall selection. And I like Achiuwa as a prospect. I think he can guard a lot of positions. I think he offers solid hustle at that big man spot. And I think he'll bolster the front court that was really starving for depth last season. If you remember, when Bam got hurt, it was really just, okay, do we play Kelly Olynyk? Do we play Myers Leonard? And they really didn't have an answer for that front court position once Bam got hurt. He ultimately came back and played very well in the finals. But I think Achiuwa immediately helps with that. He brings the physicality off the bench, and that's really where Miami needs him most. So I think he fits in perfectly as a guy who's just an all-out hustle guy, can defend multiple positions, and just an absolute bruiser defensively. So I really like the Achiuwa pick. I think it makes a lot of sense from a win-now perspective, which obviously that's the lens Miami is looking at the draft through. So good pick for Miami. I like that a lot. So the Bucks traded out of the first round and got Drew Holiday for an absolute king's ransom, but they still ended up with two players in the class. At 45, I really buy the Jordan Nwora pick, as he was one of the best shooters in this class in my opinion. The Bucks need that, and they also need someone at Nwora's size who can really just shoot the ball. This team was starving for a wing-sized prospect, and I'm really happy they got their guy in Jordan Nwora. The Merrill pick at 60, the Sam Merrill pick from Utah State at 60, I'm a little bit more shaky on. I would have liked to see him grab another wing, as they'll be searching high and low for players to make up their roster. Guys like Nate Hinton and Najee Marshall, I would have really liked there. But they went with Merrill, and I think it's just kind of redundant for a team that already has a bunch of 6'3 to 6'5 shooting guards in like Dante DiVincenzo and Pat Connaughton. So not a huge fan of the Merrill pick, but I think the Nwora pick was definitely a home run for Milwaukee at 45. Busy night for Minnesota. They took Anthony Edwards at 1, which is definitely the move I would have done if I were in Minnesota's position. He just adds such a needed off-ball scoring element and can play next to D'Angelo Russell and alongside Karl Anthony Towns. There are obviously concerns with Edwards in Minnesota, but I think they have a decent enough situation set up for him. The Timberwolves then took Leandro Bolmaro at 23. Obviously, if you know me, you know I'm not a fan of Bolmaro. Obviously wasn't a fan of the pick. He's a stash guy, and I had him as a late second rounder. He's a guy where I question his usefulness without the ball. So getting to a team with a pretty loaded backcourt just doesn't really do it for me. And then at 28, they took Jaden McDaniels, who I think was totally worth a swing late in the first round. He's just a guy oozing with upside and should give Minnesota a very real wing prospect next to Jarrett Culver. The guy can shoot, dribble, pass at 6'9", which I think is really impressive. So, So overall, I think going 2 for 3 in this draft, I think is good enough. They obviously can't all hit, but I do think Anthony Edwards was the right call, and I think Jaden McDaniels was another solid pick for Minnesota as well. The Grizzlies knocked the draft out of the park, in my opinion. Getting Desmond Bane at 30 was just a phenomenal pick. The TCU guard/forward should come in right away and bolster a Memphis backcourt that probably needs a little bit more shooting, as Bane was like a 44% three-point shooter this past season. I said it back in May, and I'll say it again here. Desmond Bane is my sneaky pick to win Rookie of the Year. He's just so NBA ready. And honestly, I'm going to guarantee it right now. He will end up on an all-NBA rookie team this year. 5 picks later, they ended up getting Xavier Tillman from Michigan State. And listen, I just think he's an elite character guy to have in the locker room, to have around other guys. I'm not really sure he'll get a ton of minutes this year, though, just because Memphis has a lot of mouths to feed in terms of their front court options with Brandon Clark, Jaren Jackson Jr., Jonas Valanciunas, and people of that nature. On top of those, though, they actually ended up getting Killian Tilly on a two-way deal. And if you know me, you know I love Killian Tilly. I had him ranked 24th on my board, and he was the highest player on my board to go undrafted. He's a lottery-level prospect, in my opinion, if he stays healthy. And listen, he's just a phenomenal shooter, passer, defender. I just think it's a really smart play from Memphis to bring him in and see what he can do. If he can stay healthy, I think you're really getting a legitimate piece for the future here. So New Orleans only had 1 pick at 13, and I think they absolutely drilled it. I think they did a great job. They took Kyra Lewis Jr., the guard from Alabama, who was really starting to rise on my board. I had him at 11th as my final big board, but honestly, if had the draft been a month later, he probably would have ended up in the top 10, if not higher. Listen, the guy is lightning quick, and he's just a perfect philosophical and personnel fit for New Orleans, which loves to get up and down with Lonzo Ball and Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram. And so, listen, I think this is an awesome fit, an awesome pick for New Orleans at 13. So I just cannot wait to see this team on the floor next year. The Knicks got their guy in Obi Toppin at 8. There are rumors about them possibly trying to trade up, but they stayed put, and that was clearly the right move for them. Toppin will provide instant offense for a team that just desperately needs raw production. His defense is a concern, as well as his immediate fit with New York, as they have like a billion power forwards on that roster. But I still like Toppin long-term for his well-rounded offensive skill set. At 25, they took Emmanuel Quickley out of Kentucky. Not super excited at this pick. Quickley is a great kid, but I think 25 was a little bit of a reach for him. Also, I would have liked to see the Knicks address their true point guard concerns in this draft. I think a Malachi Flynn pick would have done them well. But, this roster is just kind of a wasteland at the point guard position at the moment. And Quickley is a guy who I'm not really super confident he can end up running an NBA offense. I think Flynn was a guy that you could have asked to do that. But regardless, I think, with the Toppin pick, I think they got their guy. And that's enough for the Knicks to consider this draft a success. I like the upside-oriented draft for Oklahoma City. This team is clearly trying to tank. They have about 1 trillion first-round picks between now and 2026. But the Alexei Pokusevski pick at 17 is definitely one that I think is worth betting on, given the current situation in Oklahoma City. If he clicks, you're getting a transcendent 7-foot guard who can really do anything on the floor if asked. Obviously, there's high bust potential as well. But again, the Thunder have all the time in the world, so they should just be thrilled to get a guy with his upside. At 34, they took Teo Maledon, who I just love for this team as well. I had him ranked 19th on my board, but he slid into the second round, so that's a big steal. Maledon, you're getting a smart NBA guard. He gets to his spots extremely well, and again, listen, I really like him next to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander as well. I do think he could develop into an NBA-level starting point guard. 37th, they took Vit Krejci, and listen, not a huge fan of the pick here. He was outside my top 100, so Listen, he has decent ball skills, I guess. He's 6'8", he's a point guard in Europe, but he did so on very limited playing time in production. So I would have liked to get a more proven player here, but again, Oklahoma City is totally buying into the long-term plays here, so I guess it makes sense for their timeline, but I just would have liked to see maybe a more proven college guard or a college wing in this situation. So the Magic only had one pick in this year's draft, and they took Cole Anthony just outside the lottery at 15. Usually the Magic are all about length, but they opted for the 6'3" point guard out of North Carolina, who averaged 19 points, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists for an underachieving Tar Heels team last season. Listen, I really like the upside play here for Orlando just because I think Orlando is a team that's starving for upside. The Jonathan Isaac injury hurt them a lot. Mo Bamba hasn't given you the value you want for a top 5 pick. Aaron Gordon, I think, is close to his ceiling. And Markelle Fultz, obviously, we all know the concerns with him. So honestly, I think you look at Cole Anthony, and I think he'll be in a great position to compete for minutes right away. And honestly, he's a Rookie of the Year favorite for me just because of the opportunity he should be granted to just kind of run the show for the Orlando Magic this season. I love what the Sixers did on draft night. Getting Tyrese Maxey at 21 should really help bring depth to both guard spots. I worry about his shooting translating and improving, but I'll bet on the kid here. Super hard worker, high character guy, and I think that's worthwhile at 21. At 49, they took Isaiah Joe, who many believe to be the best shooter in the draft. You know my concerns with him. He only shot 34% from 3 this past season, so I'm a little bit lower on him, but still I do like the overall focus on shooting and guard play that Philadelphia has seemed to have. They also ended up getting Danny Green and Seth Curry in offseason deals, which I think will totally revamp their roster and, again, make them a lot more valuable this coming season. Then at 58, they took a swing on Paul Reed. Many had Reed as a first-round pick, so to get him at 58, I think was a really nice bargain. He's super toolsy, obviously, but he can defend, and his frame is encouraging enough for the NBA. He can become a nice depth four-man for the Sixers. So for me, with that class of Maxey, Joe, and Reed, I really think the Sixers are just an absolute huge winner of draft night. Phoenix had a pretty confusing draft night for me. I really like Jalen Smith as a prospect, don't get me wrong, but I think they chose the wrong direction here. They have a long-term center with DeAndre Ayton looking like a cornerstone, so the Suns must be pretty confident like Smith can play the 4, right? I think he can, but I still think it's up in the air. I would have liked to see them grab Tyrese Halliburton or Devin Vassell instead of another big. But, I love Smith. I hate the landing spot. Why waste a top 10 pick on a guy who projects as a backup big with your current roster construction? I just don't really get it. On the plus side, though, they did get Tyshawn Alexander on a 2-way deal. And again, he was in my sleepers video, so I really like Alexander as a guy who can, in time, provide a nice scoring punch off the bench in the near future from a combo guard position. But still, I think Phoenix's night was subpar in my opinion, and it had nothing to do with Jalen Smith and everything to do with the roster fit around Jalen Smith. Portland ended up trading their 16th pick in order to get Robert Covington from Houston, and I think that makes a lot of sense considering where Houston is and where Portland is as a franchise. I think the move was definitely worth it. At 46, they did take CJ Elleby from Washington State. I had Elleby outside my top 60, so I don't really love the pick for Portland, but he does offer a nice scoring package, and maybe that can turn into something in a few years. I probably see him as a G League type player for the next few seasons. I was really hoping they would take Jay Scrubb here, as they had been rumored to be linked to him in the days leading up to the draft, but alas, Elleby could certainly end up proving me wrong. I just think there was better talent available at 46. Sound the alarms. The Kings had a good draft. They took Tyrese Halliburton at 12, who I really like. I had him 5th on my board. They got him 7 spots past that, which is always a win in my opinion. Halliburton should really just fit in seamlessly with De'Aaron Fox and Buddy Hield. He can either play the 1 or the 2, and I think that'll really help him get playing time early in Sacramento. He's also just an all-time character guy. Nobody has a bad word to say about him. So he should really just be an awesome fit in Sacramento as a whole. At 40, the Kings got Robert Woodard from Mississippi State. And again, just another guy who was higher on my board than where he ended up being selected. The Kings are getting a strong 2-way forward who should outperform his draft position if that 3-point shooting he showed at Mississippi State during his sophomore year is legit. And then at 43, they took Jamias Ramsey, who is a guy I had at 34 on my final big board, I believe. And listen, I like him a lot. I think, it's going to be difficult for him to get minutes early just because there's a lot of guards there in Sacramento. But overall, though, I think the upside is definitely worth betting on in the middle of the second round where Sacramento got him. So really, the Kings did an awesome job drafting. Thrilled for Sacramento fans with De'Aaron Fox. I think he's going to be a really good player for you guys for a long time. And so, yeah, Kings fans should be really excited. I think they did a very good job. After several cryptic tweets suggesting that the Spurs would do something crazy, it turns out that those were all just for their new Fiesta uniforms. And while those are cool uniforms, the Spurs did play it very safe on draft night, taking Devin Vassell at 11 and Trey Jones at 41. I think this was the right call for San Antonio, though. I love the Vassell pick as a guy who can just come in, be a really high-level 3-and-D player as his defensive intelligence will really be used well in San Antonio, and then obviously his three-point shooting and overall offensive package, I think really gives the Spurs like an analytics-friendly prospect that they just desperately needed. At 41, Trey Jones is another solid pick, just a tough, gritty, defensive-minded point guard who makes his teammates better. I see him as a backup guard in the league, but I'm worried if he can crack a deep Spurs backcourt. Early in his career, obviously they got Lonnie Walker, DeJounte Murray, just a bunch of those guys. I'm not really sure if Jones can get a lot of run, but I do think his ceiling is rather high for a backup point guard. It seems like Toronto kind of hedged their bets by taking Malachi Flynn at 29. It seemed like they were probably worried about Fred VanVleet walking out the door in free agency. He ultimately ended up staying in Toronto. But I still like the Flynn pick for Toronto. I think he's the type of player that the Raptors have kind of taken and just made into a high-level player for years now. I do wonder, though, if they would have targeted a big man knowing that Serge Ibaka was going to leave and VanVleet was going to stay. But regardless, I think Flynn is a fine pick there. At 59, they took Jalen Harris from Nevada, and Harris, honestly, is a pure scorer. Probably will spend a lot of time with Raptors 905 this season, but I don't hate the pick at 59. You're just kind of looking for guys who can ultimately end up on a roster, and Harris does have the NBA-level scoring package to maybe crack some rotations for an NBA team in the near future. But overall, though, given what happened to Toronto in free agency, losing Serge Ibaka, possibly losing Marc Gasol, and then keeping VanVleet, I do wonder if they probably should have taken a big guy just so they can just kind of have some guy to just kind of fill the void left by Ibaka and potentially Marc Gasol. All right, so the Utah Jazz took Udoka Azubuike at 27, and I guess I get the reasoning behind the pick, but I'm not really sure if I like it. I would have liked to see him use it on a two-way guard or a two-way wing prospect, just kind of add to that overall depth. But, Udoka Azubuike is basically the same player as Rudy Gobert, except much worse, obviously. But, it will be easy to scheme Azubuike into games and take some of the load off Gobert just because they basically play him the exact same way. They don't have to really change up defensive coverages as much. But, I would have liked to see him use this pick on a two-way type of player who could help on the perimeter a little bit more. Luckily, though, at 39, they did end up taking Elijah Hughes from Syracuse, who I really like as just kind of that guy who can come in, maybe add some scoring punch off the bench for the Jazz during his first few seasons in the NBA. And he can provide decent defense as well. So, I don't think they took the right guy at 27, but I think they made up for it with the guy at 39 and Elijah Hughes. And finally, we have the Washington Wizards. So I'm not a huge fan of the Deni Avdija pick at 9. He fills a need as a playmaking wing who can offer solid basketball IQ, but I just really question his overall upside as a player as I have gone down this rabbit hole countless times on this channel. I do like the pick better at 9, though, than I would have at 5. So that's a win for Washington in that regard. At 53, Washington also took Michigan State point guard Cassius Winston, who I just adore as a prospect. I had him as a first rounder and labeled him the best pick and roll guard in the class. He's just a savant when it comes to ball screens, and he has just a phenomenal shooting stroke as well. Again, he won't help the Wizards' putrid defense, but I like what he can offer as a backup floor general, especially if those minutes open up if John Wall does in fact get traded. So what's next? With the 2020 draft behind us, it's now time to shift gears and focus on the 2020-2021 college basketball season. It starts in less than a week now, and I'm really excited to get going on that. I have a preview coming out rather soon, and so make sure you guys stay tuned for that. If you guys like college basketball, I'll be focusing mainly on that. Should be a lot better season than last year. I know last year college basketball was just brutal to watch. I could barely watch it myself. And listen, the 2021 draft is supposed to be way better than the 2020 draft. So if you enjoyed my content for 2020, you guys are going to love my content for 2021. Better players, higher upsides, just deeper drafts in general. And so 2021 should be really fun. Make sure you guys stick around for that. If you guys have been with me since 2020, and since May when I started this, thank you guys so much for remaining loyal to the channel. I love interacting with all you guys. Thank you guys for every comment. Thank you guys for every like, every subscription that you guys have given me. Really, it means so much to me. And listen, let's keep it going in 2021. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you are too. And I will see you all real soon. Thanks.